very good experience to find yourself being told that you're not quite there yet on 680, so you keep on going, and you end up in San Jose. And then you turn around and try to rush back. But somehow the Lord got us here. Everything that could have been thrown against us on the road was car trouble and everything else, so we're very grateful to be here. I kept saying over and over as I prayed going down the road that this had to be something tonight, some type of fantastic meeting, because usually when we're this well fought getting to a place, something's going to take place. So I came in expecting something. I'm sure you were expecting to leave as late as it is. But if you must go, as they said, go ahead. Otherwise, bear with me. I'll try not to keep you too long. The only complaint that my pastor has against me is that I'm long-winded. And the only complaint that another pastor had last Sunday night was that I wasn't long-winded enough. He wanted to go to 11. And I promise not to keep you that late. But anyway, I don't fool around, so I'll just start right out. I can only make you one promise that what I've got to say is the truth. It won't seem that way to some of you. It'll just seem that I'm either crazy or I'm the biggest liar and storyteller in the world. That's what our televisions have done to us. They've gotten us to a frame of mind that we do not realize the real world around us. When I talk in many youth rallies, many of the Christian schools, I start right out by tearing their television and rock idols down by personal experiences that I've had with them in the occult world. And then from there we try to build them up with real heroes, the number one being Jesus Christ. But I come from a family where I grew up having my own heroes. My number one hero was my great, somewhere way back there, grandfather, named Francis Collins. Francis Collins owned the first ship that the Puritans landed in here. It just so happened that 50% of the people on board were also witchcraft people fleeing from Scotland. And they were called the Collinses. They were all his family, and that's how all witchcraft came to the United States. So when I grew up, I was being trained how great my family was, that it was the second most important family in the Illuminati in the occult world, and that someday I'd be very important and so on. So I had my own heroes. And television didn't help much. The reason I'm so down on television is I grew up around the television world, on the insides of it. When I was just a teenager, Hollywood paid for my way out to California so that I could bring a couple of diaries that belonged to my family that I had inherited by will as the last male heir of the Collins family. If you wondered why that fits with Todd's, the Collins family changed their name about 100 years ago to Todd to cover up some of the things that they had done. But I'm sure some of you will remember the show Dark Shadows. That was the show that paid for me to come to Hollywood to bring the diaries. Many of the scripts were taken from actual incidences in the diaries. And for instance, Barnabas Collins was based upon a man named Franz Williams Collins, a Revolutionary War hero. When I was growing up in the occult world, we were always taught that we had been somebody else before. It wasn't good enough that we were the person we were now. We always had to be a dozen people that we were before. We had to deal with this life and all the ones we were supposed to have had before, and all the ones we were going to have in the future. And I was supposed to be in Franz Williams Collins. As I said, that's who they based Barnabas on, so I wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world. I grew up this way. When I was 13, I was taken into what is called the outer court to be trained as a priest in witchcraft. That had been like your pastor who just stepped off, or better yet, more like the youth director or something. When I was 18, I was initiated a high priest. That would have made me the pastor. At the same time, I became draft exempt. I did not have to go into service, but a bunch of us smart-aleck young, I have to correct the pastor, not warlocks, but wizards and witches, went into the Army because we felt the Army really needed witchcraft. It just couldn't get along without us. And since the Army didn't think that they needed any chaplains that were witches, we just kind of went in on our own. So I went on in, along with a lot of others, and I never did anything, I guess, halfway. I got in Vietnam, found out I liked Vietnam so well, I was willing to re-enlist. In fact, I'd already signed the papers to stay for another tour in Vietnam when I became wounded in the last month of the first tour, and I was shipped back to the United States. My time was almost up, so I was discharged, and the same day I re-enlisted. I asked for Vietnam, and they said because of my wounds that hadn't totally healed yet, I couldn't go to Vietnam yet, so I got Germany. And I had re-enlisted for 6 years. And until the time of my re-enlistment, I always thought that witchcraft was just witchcraft. There was nothing more to witchcraft. than just casting spells, and that we were smarter than the Christians and other religions because we really knew who the gods were, and we were born with special powers because our ancestors had passed them down to us, and all the little stories they like to tell us. Witchcraft was a little different at that time. When I first got into it as a young person, you had to be from a family that had generations after generations of witchcraft. In order to be a coven member at the time, you had to have 3 generations at least. While the minimum that I had that we could find was 7. So there wasn't any problem, and we knew it went past that where there weren't records kept anymore. But that was all witchcraft was. As I tell many people, when many of you were raised as Christians, and I guess that's why I can't understand why some of the Christian teenagers are the way they are today. If they were raised in this glorious gospel, why they're so rebellious. I would have given anything to have been raised this way. But when you were learning the 23rd Psalm, I was learning the witches' chant. When you were reading about Moses opening the Red Sea, I was reading J.R.R. Tolkien. When you guys were learning different memory verses and so on, and the 4 spiritual laws and the 10 commandments, I was happening to read C.S. Lewis. Of course, I've been greatly surprised that Christians read that too. But this is the way I grew up, and this is all I believed in, was just that there were mighty gods and we were special people. We were their priests and priestesses. Until I re-enlisted. I went to Germany, spent a month home, went to Germany, spent another month. 2 months out of a 6-year enlistment. One night while taking drugs and drinking, I shot and killed an officer in downtown Stuttgart. Now, if there's one thing that the Army does not like, it does not like its sergeants killing its officers. They have a quick cure for that. They threw me in solitary confinement. And as the court-martial proceeded on, and things began to look like I was going to spend the rest of my life in Leavenworth if I was lucky, all of a sudden a riot took place in the stockade, and although I was in solitary confinement, other people were placed in the cell with me. One of the men that was placed in the cell with me had been scheduled to get out that particular day and was held because of the riot. So I kind of talked him in by bribing him a little that if he made a long-distance phone call for me and told certain relatives of mine that I was in trouble, he'd receive some money for it and I'd be a lot happier. So he called collect to Los Angeles and talked to my foster mother, explained what the situation was. And I was sitting back waiting for her to get all these big witches together to cast spells on the judges and make all the officers that were trying me think I was a real nice guy and that it was self-defense and everything was going to be fine. They'd just let me off. Now that's all that I had ever been taught that witches could do. But 3 days later, my cell door opened there in solitary. As I stepped out in the light for the first time in 32 days, I heard some very strange words. You are honorably discharged from the United States Army. And the man that was saying them was a senator by the name of William Saxby. He had a congressman with him named Wiley and about 3 or 4 generals, and they were handing me an honorable discharge. And on the discharge papers, it didn't say I was bad, didn't say that I had been in jail, didn't say anything. It gave me all my time and rank, security clearances that I had in my possession, and didn't explain why I still had over 5 years to go in the United States Army. It just discharged me honorably. So I took it and didn't want to argue with him and left and went back to the States and arrived at my home in Columbus, Ohio. I asked my real mother, I have 2 mothers, foster mother and a real mother. I said, what type of spell is so good that it makes senators and generals do what you want? And it's a really good spell. I'd like to learn it. She just looked at me and said, you just don't understand, do you? She said, we didn't cast a spell on them. They're with us. I said, oh, far out. Senators that are witches. She says, no, they just belong to us. And I didn't understand what she was saying. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do now? You know, I'd like to take my old coven back over and so on. So she handed me an envelope that had been waiting there. She'd explained that there was one there and one in Los Angeles. They didn't quite know where I was going to show up. I opened the envelope. Very intriguing thing. $2,000 in $100 bills. A lot of money. Also was a one-way plane ticket to New York City. I said, well, what's this for? She said, well, you make a reservation, you get on the next plane, you get out of here and you get to New York City and they'll meet you at the airport. I said, well, who are they? And where did this money come from? She says, you get there and they'll tell you and you'll know who's supposed to meet you when you get there. Now, witches are very curious people. That's why when we do some of the most demonic rites imaginable and our hair would stand on end and almost turn snow white overnight from all the spooky things, we couldn't wait to get back in there. We were always curious what was going to happen the next. I think that's why some of the people get on roller coasters and like to be scared to death. It's just the way with the witches. They really